Welcome everyone to the Kentucky Kid. I'm Kelly Berry. Thank you for joining me here today. Sorry I wasn't here the last couple of weeks, but I've been under the weather, but thankfully I'm here right in time to talk about the March Madness, which I'm sure everyone here in Kentucky is looking forward to. One team from around this area that had their March Madness ended a little bit early, Kentucky, who lost in the first round of the NIT to Robert Morris Tuesday night, 59-57. In many ways, and this is coming from me as a UK fan, I'm sort of relieved that Kentucky got beat. Now, don't get me wrong whenever I say that. I wanted them to win the NIT and I wanted them to go as far as they possibly could. But this season has literally been very, very painful to watch. And in my opinion, since I've started watching Kentucky basketball and college basketball in general, it's been the second most painful season that I've ever watched, next to the last time we went to the NIT back in Billy Gillespie's last year, which I'm sure everyone wants to forget, and I'm sorry for bringing that up. But as far as Kentucky's team is concerned this year looking back, I know they were a bunch of young guys that were thrown together and had to play on a team. You had Ryan Harrow that was absent earlier in the year. You had Nerlens Noel getting hurt. But seriously, there is no reason why any team, especially a team with that much talent, should be playing this inconsistently this late in the year. Oh well, at least they're better than Grambling State, who went 0-28 this year. But the brackets are out, that's the good news, and as usual, I do have my own take and a few issues on it. But first of all, I would just want to say that the committee did an admirable job selecting the teams. They had a daunting, unenviable task in front of them, and I thought they did a pretty good job. It's been a crazy, crazy year in college basketball, and they had to deduce who did deserve and who did not deserve a spot in the tourney. With that said, like I said, there are a couple of issues that I do have with the tournament. I was surprised that Kansas got the second number one seed. I thought that would go to Indiana, but it was very clear that this year's selection committee gave a heavy weight on the conference tournaments as opposed to the season as a whole. That's why Louisville got the best number one seed. They won the Big East. Called that one, by the way. That might be the last good thing I call this year. But they won the Big East. Kansas won the Big 12. Indiana lost in the Big 10 tournament. And that's probably why Louisville got the number one overall and then Kansas got the number two. I didn't really have an issue with the four number one seeds as a whole. I figured Gonzaga would be one. Indiana has been a solid team all year. Louisville's been a solid team all year. And Kansas has been a pretty good team as well. The first thing that jumped out at me, though, was the placement of the number two seeds. I know there's been a geographic emphasis of late in the selection process where you want as many teams, especially seeds 1 through 4, playing as close to home as possible. I get that. At the same time, I want to see the best number one play the worst number two, the worst number one play the best number two, and so on. You know, the number one team in the country against number 8, 4 versus 5, 3 versus 6, 2 versus 7. That's how the tournament is supposed to work. And instead you have, as I look at bracket here, you have Louisville playing in the same bracket as Duke, and you have Gonzaga playing in the same bracket as Ohio State. Louisville's the best number one, Gonzaga's the worst number one, Duke is the best number two, and Ohio State is the worst number two. Put Ohio State with Louisville, in the Midwest bracket and ship Duke down to the West bracket to play against to play against Gonzaga potentially. I know that means that Duke would play in the West bracket. That's far away from Duke's home. I get that. But I think that if you're Duke, you would rather play out the Oregon Trail in the West bracket as opposed to playing in the murderous Midwest that also has Michigan State as a 3, St. Louis as a 4, Oklahoma State as a 5, a very, very loaded bracket. I mentioned that I thought the selection committee placed a heavy emphasis on conference tournaments. The first inconsistency, though, of this came when Florida was given a 3 seed. Florida's a good team, and if they won the SEC tournament, I wouldn't really have a problem with them getting this seed, but they didn't. They lost to an Ole Miss team that, outside of Marshall Henderson, really isn't that good. Yet they were given a 3. I thought they should have been a 4. If the committee is going to weigh conference tournaments that heavily, put St. Louis as a 3 seed, who won the Atlantic 10, which, by the way, I think was a tougher conference than the SEC was this year, and give Florida that 4 seed that St. Louis has. One glaring atrocity, and this is keeping with the pattern of my issue with the selection committee's consistency regarding conference tournaments, is Oregon as a 12 seed. This is a team that was ranked very, very high about midway through the year, hit a slump, had a couple of guys get hurt, but bounced back to win the Pac-12 tournament. The committee should have given them a higher seed because Villanova was a 9, which I thought was too high. Oklahoma was a 10, which was too high for them. And then you have Oregon, who actually won their conference, which it seemed like the selection committee was giving a heavy emphasis toward, but instead Oregon gets a 12 seed, and Villanova and Oklahoma, who both lost in the quarterfinals of their conference tournaments, get higher seeds than the Ducks. I thought Oregon should have been higher, Villanova should have been lower, and Oklahoma should have been lower. That's my issues with all of the seeds. There's really only one team that I thought should have gotten in and did not, and it's not Kentucky. It's Southern Miss. Southern Miss plays in the Conference USA. They got all the way to the conference tournament championship game, lost to Memphis, who's a 6 seed, in double overtime. Look back at Villanova as a 9 and Oklahoma as a 10 seed. Let's compare the RPIs of these 3 teams. Southern Miss is a 34th ranked RPI. The Oklahoma Sooners are 42nd, and Villanova is 51st. Southern Miss got further in their conference tournament than these 2 teams. They have a higher RPI. I thought they should have been in and dropped one of these 2 teams. Despite all of these negatives, I still think the selection committee did a good job. But if you're going to give Louisville and Kansas preferential treatment for winning their conference tournaments, you have to do the same thing to Oregon and Southern Miss. Consistency is critical in a selection process.